Today's story is not folklore, it's not legend. It's a case buried across decades of church ledgers, missing reports, and burned down homesteads. A forgotten line of children, some say twins, some say copies, raised by a woman who vanished from public life after a scandal in 1921. Locals called them the mirror children. If you found a photograph, one that shouldn't exist, of two barefoot boys standing outside a cabin that's no longer on any map, and when you looked at their faces you realized they were the same, but not quite, like someone had copied a child and something went wrong in the process. Would you keep the photo or would you burn it? Welcome to Gothic Ledger. I want you to do something for me right now. Look at the clock, write the time you're watching this, and tell us where you are in the world, because no matter how far you are from Kentucky, this story has a way of circling back. They weren't enrolled in school, they were never baptized, no birth records, no graves, but they kept being seen, two at a time, moving in perfect sync. And in 2019, a government drone caught them on video. Let me tell you what the state buried and what the land refused to keep quiet. This is a story about genetics, isolation, and a woman who may have engineered her own bloodline. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel. If you've been with us before, you know the rules. Keep the lights low. Listen closely. And if you see something move in the corner of your screen, don't look away. And we begin with a photograph that no one remembers taking. In early spring of 1939, following record floods that swept through southeastern Kentucky, a team of local archivists was dispatched to salvage what they could from the submerged rooms beneath the Leslie County Courthouse. Most of what they found was expected. Tax records warped by mold, birth registries blurred into unreadable ink, and waterlogged ledgers too fragile to touch. But in the bottom of an unmarked drawer, inside a warped metal filing cabinet, there was something else. A photograph. Faded, curled at the edges, stuck between two blank folio sheets, like something that had been hidden, not stored. The image was simple. Two barefoot boys standing side by side in front of a collapsing cabin. Their shirts hang off their shoulders like hand-me-downs from another decade. One boy's mouth is slightly open, the other's eyes don't seem to focus at all. Their faces are nearly identical, but not perfectly. One eye slightly lower, a jaw misaligned. It's a match, but off. Like mirrored reflections that didn't settle cleanly. There's no stamp, no studio mark, no writing on the back. No negatives were ever found. And yet to those who've worked the archives longest, the photo feels deliberate, as if someone meant for it to be found later or not at all. According to the 1939 flood damage cleanup log, the image was logged without incident, filed with a generic label, unknown children, possible homestead case. The archivist who entered it, Martha Sullivan, later claimed she didn't remember cataloguing it. In a 1973 oral history, she said, "It gave me a feeling like I was interrupting something. I boxed it and moved on." But it didn't stay boxed. In 1951, the photo resurfaced in a local historical society's unsorted drawer, and again in 1986, this time referenced in a brief report on unmarked homesteads in the Appalachian interior. By then, folklorists had begun whispering a name, the Mirror Children. Most trace that term back to a retired mail carrier, Edward Tullis, who in an interview recorded in 1969 said this: "They weren't twins, not really, but they matched, like someone tried to make one copy from the other, and the ink ran out halfway. You'd see 'em if you rode the mail up near Hollow Ridge back then, just standing quiet at the tree line, watching." When the photograph was shown to elderly locals during a regional oral folklore project in the 1990s, a few recognized the background. Not the boys, but the cabin, the sloping roof, the warped porch beam, the missing third step. That homestead, they said, once belonged to a woman named Lilla May Merriweather, known to the community only as Miss Lilla. She lived alone, if she could be called that, on the edge of Hollow Ridge, outside Cheyenne, Kentucky. She hadn't been seen in town since the early 1920s. No census listed children in her household. No school in the county had ever enrolled boys matching the ones in the photo, and no obituary, baptism, or hospital record named Lilla as a mother. But still, the rumors persisted. According to a now-lost WPA field notebook from 1940, Miss Lilla's cabin was inhabited by two pale boys who may not be her kin. That line, scrawled in pencil, is all that remains. To this day, no one knows who took the photo. No one remembers giving it to the court, nor why it ended up misfiled beneath a stack of pre-war property deeds. But archivists and researchers agree something about it is wrong. The faces, the posture, the way neither boy seems entirely aware of the camera nor of each other. And that image still exists. Box 14, File 6, Leslie County Archives. Stamped but never explained. Dated only by water damage and suspicion. The first known trace of the story that would become folklore. The beginning of the Mirror Children. And someone, perhaps Lilla H., herself wanted it to be seen, just not yet. In the quiet interior of Leslie County, where roads curl into the roots of forgotten hills, there stands a ridge locals still call Hollow Ridge, though no official map bears the name. The land there is tangled and damp, heavy with laurel and fog. Hunters say their dogs won't follow scent into it. The trees, they say, feel too still. At the center of that stillness once stood a cabin, slumping now into the soil, but intact enough in 1938 to serve as a home. It was here, records suggest, that Lilla May Merriweather lived, and where the first unspoken chapter of the Mirror Children began. Lilla was born in 1889, the third of 6 children in the Merriweather family, a line that had long occupied the Cheyenne area, mostly in the margins of land deeds and census logs. The last official record placing her in public life is a 1906 property transaction when she inherited the cabin after her mother's death. She was 17. The property was modest, one-room structure, well fed by a spring that dried every 3rd summer. No known upgrades, no plumbing, no official improvements ever filed. Yet the taxes were paid, always in exact change, always in person, until 1921. That year, everything stopped. Lilla withdrew suddenly from town life, and rumors filled the space she left behind. The reason, hidden in whispers and suppressed by time, is hinted at in a 1923 church ledger from the First Baptist Church of Cheyenne. A single line beneath her name reads, "Stricken from the rolls on grounds of moral unfitness." There is no elaboration, no footnote, but locals remember. A former church secretary, interviewed in 1978, recalled overhearing an elders' meeting behind closed doors. She remembered the pastor saying Lilla had brought unholy confusion into the household, that her youngest brother Samuel had vanished shortly after a long illness. No missing person report was filed. From that year on, Lilla never again appeared in church records, voter logs, or town ledgers. She did not marry. She did not bury. She simply stopped being seen. Until 1938. That's when reports began to circulate, quiet at first, about figures spotted near Hollow Ridge, 2 boys, pale and lean, seen gathering kindling near the tree line, always together, always silent. No one knew their names, no one recalled a birth. They didn't attend the county school, They weren't listed in the 1940 census, and the nearest midwife denied ever delivering twins that fit their description. And yet, there they were, visible to a handful of hunters and a single rural postman who described them as identical but not. It was like seeing the same face on two clocks, he said. One ran fast, one ran slow, but they ticked the same. The boys were always near the cabin, never further than 100 yards. They never answered when called out to, and Lilla, older now, her hair long and grey, was said to appear on the porch once every 2 weeks when the mail wagon came up the ridge. She'd stand motionless until the driver dropped off the parcel. No wave, no words. The few who dared climb past the old fence line said the land felt strange, like something was watching even in daylight. One farmer recalled his horse refusing to step within 30 feet of the front gate. Like the ground itself was holding breath, he told a folklorist in 1964. No birth certificates were ever filed, no names, no records of adoption, and still, from 1938 until at least 1954, Leela lived with them, 2 boys who bore no traceable origin, growing older but never outward. No friends, no visitors, no questions. And the question remains, were they hers? Were they family? Were they something else? Whatever they were hers. And whatever happened in that cabin over those 16 years, it happened outside the view of any authority. Leela May. Merriweather didn't just leave public life, she erased it, and in its place something else took root. The Appalachian backroads in 1949 were less road than memory, gravel folding into forest, sun swallowed by overgrowth. For a travelling merchant like Howard Kitchener, who hauled crates of nails, lanterns, and kerosene stoves across 3 counties, the way in was half forgotten, and the way out never certain. On June 17th of that year, his route took him along the upper ridgeline west of High N, near a hollow rarely marked on maps. Locals called it Dead Mare Cut, a place avoided even by moonshiners. Kitchener hadn't planned to stop, just pass through and reach a homestead rumoured to be in need of stovepipe. But the road narrowed too quickly, and his mule team stalled at a bend near an old cedar post fence. That's when he saw them. 2 boys stood on the porch of a collapsing cabin framed by leaning beams and weather-grey wood. They were barefoot, shirted in fabric far too large for them, arms at their sides, no fidget, no greeting, just stillness. They didn't look at me exactly, Kitchener later wrote. One was staring somewhere behind me and the other, well, I don't think he was seeing at all. He continued, their faces were alike, but wrong, like someone tried to match 2 halves of a coin after the mold had melted. Their eyes were cloudy, not white, not blind, just wrong, like river water behind fog. There was no sound from the cabin, no movement. Kitchener tipped his hat, mumbled a polite, "Howdy," and clicked the reins. Neither child blinked. That evening, disturbed and unsure what he'd witnessed, Kitchener did something rare for his profession. He sat at the small desk of the boarding house where he stayed in High N and wrote a letter to the Kentucky State Welfare Office in Frankfort. The letter, dated June 18, 1949, read, "To whom it may concern, I am a traveling merchant of tools and household goods operating primarily in Leslie and Perry counties. Yesterday, while passing through the upper ridge above High N, I came upon a cabin I had not seen before. On the porch stood 2 young boys. They appeared to be undernourished but not starved, barefoot, unspeaking. They did not react when I spoke. I saw no sign of a guardian or parent. I am writing not because of injury or neglect in the physical sense, but because no child should look that empty. Their expressions were blank. Their movements were absent. They weren't dirty. They weren't bruised. Just hollow. That's worse. I do not know if this warrants your attention, but something about them was wrong in a way I cannot explain. I believe they are in need of help of some kind. Respectfully, Howard J. Kitchener. The letter was logged in a clerical ledger dated June 22nd. The log itself still exists, unearthed during a university archival project in the 1990s. The entry, labeled Rural Report, High-End Vicinity, Unknown Minors, was never assigned a case number. That year, Kentucky's welfare system received over 4,000 letters from rural counties, most handwritten, many without return addresses. According to a former intake clerk interviewed decades later, anything from high-end went to the bottom, too far gone, too few roads. The Kitchener letter joined a stack of unfiled reports in a box marked Non-Urgent, Remote Claims. The box was never reviewed. Dr. Melissa Burr, a regional historian and author of Hollows Without Maps, later said of the letter, "That was the moment the state had a chance. A man with no reason to lie saw something that didn't sit right. He wrote it down, and they shelved it." No follow-up was conducted. No one from Frankfurt visited Deadmare Cut. The boys were never identified. The cabin remained untouched. And so the letter faded, filed away in the dark, just like the children it described. A warning not lost, but simply unread. Whatever Kitchener saw on that porch, it didn't go away. It grew, quietly, unseen, until someone else came looking. The interior of the Merriweather cabin no longer stands, but fragments of its order, its rules, have been reconstructed from field notes, forensic inventories, and a handful of recovered artifacts. The picture that emerges is not of a home, but of a ritual space, fixed in place by silence, symmetry, and fear. By the early 1940s, the structure had already begun to collapse under its own age. A sagging porch, shingles rotted through. The windows, though intact, had long since been covered from the inside. Heavy burlap nailed across each pane, not for weather, but for reflection. According to one oral account collected in the 1970s, the coverings were so thick you couldn't tell day from night inside. Inside, the cabin followed rules. No mirrors, not even polished metal. Every surface that could hold a reflection, glass, oil pans, water basins, was covered, hidden, or removed. An investigator who visited the site decades later noted that even the wood stove door had been painted matte black. The windows were double covered, and a warped vanity, likely inherited, had its mirror turned to face the wall, fixed in place with rusted nails and what appeared to be dried animal sinew. Meals were eaten in silence, 3 settings, no utensils. Food passed from one chipped tin plate to another. The center of the table bore a scorched ring where something once rested, possibly a lantern or an iron crucible. A note scribbled by social worker Evelyn Cross, recovered posthumously, reads, "The boys wait for her to chew before they begin. They copy her hands, every bite matched, like clock hands clicking in unison." They were not called by names. Miss Lilla referred to them only as "my echoes." The term appears again and again in her personal effects, scraps of cloth inked with looping cursive, fragments of old hymnals altered to include plural pronouns. We rise, we fall, we echo. Local linguists later identified traces of Appalachian-inflected Gaelic in these fragments, a dialect rarely spoken beyond the 19th century, preserved only in isolated mountain pockets. The words Sheana Anam, same soul, appear carved into a wooden beam above where the boys slept. One of the few surviving pieces of direct testimony comes not from Lila, but from one of the boys himself, or at least what is believed to be his hand. Under the frame of a rusted iron bed, in thin, uneven gouges carved by nail or knife, the following was found. "My brother cries with no sound. We share the same night. I was born too late. We eat from her hand. We speak when the wind stops. The handwriting is crude, letters doubled back over themselves, as if unsure of shape or meaning. The phrase "we share the same night" appears 3 times, always spaced apart. Those who studied the markings remarked not only on the content, but the coordination. One forensic specialist noted, "It was as if the writing was done with one hand, but 2 minds." Portraits lined the walls, faces turned away. Old Merriweather family photos were found in a cedar chest during a 1960s excavation. Most were scratched through at the eyes. A few had been folded carefully down the center, and others smeared with a waxy black substance believed to be soot and lard. They had not been burned, only obscured. Tools, too, were altered. A hammerhead repurposed into a chime, a pitchfork bent into an arch and placed above the doorframe like a crude sigil. Religious items were present, but changed. A rosary with doubled crosses, a Bible with sections removed and replaced with handwritten phrases in mixed Gaelic and English. On the final page of the Psalms, the words, "They are one, born in rhythm. Let no mirror speak." In the spring of 1953, Evelyn Cross, a 24-year-old social worker from Louisville, was assigned to a newly funded outreach program tasked with locating and evaluating families living in extreme isolation throughout Appalachia. The initiative, part of a post-war public health grant, aimed to bring schooling, food stamps, and basic welfare access to forgotten hollers in counties no longer accessible by rail or regular post. Evelyn was bright, ambitious. Newly graduated from Berea College with honors in sociology and Appalachian studies, her peers described her as idealistic, perhaps to a fault. Her supervisor, in a memo dated March 9th, wrote, "Miss Cross is determined to reach those no one else will. That can be useful or dangerous." Her assignment brought her to Hyann, Kentucky, a town already known for its attrition. By 1953, more than half its residents had left due to mine closures and washed-out roads. Her driver, a local hired for navigation, refused to go past the timberline near Hollow Ridge. The roads, he said, don't like strangers. So she walked, alone, nearly 5 miles up a ravine-etched path with her satchel, a packed lunch, and a copy of the state-issued welfare assessment form. At the top of the ridge stood the Merriweather cabin, though she had no name for it yet. Her journal, meticulously kept in the early pages, was recovered years later, wrapped tightly in what appeared to be a child's cotton shirt. The fabric was stained, the binding warped, and when opened it smelled faintly of iron and earth. The first entry reads, April 3rd, 1953, 2:40 p.m. Reached the homestead. Cabin is in poor repair, no doorbell. Knocked twice, no answer. About to leave when 2 children stepped onto the porch, identical in height, posture, and clothes, no shoes. They did not speak, just watched. It was like standing between 2 reflections. The second entry just hours later. April 3rd, 1953, 6:10 p.m. Offered canned peaches, which they refused. Woman appeared. Older, white hair in a braid, face sun-darkened. She said only, "You're late." Her voice was flat. She told me they were my echoes. No names. She permitted me to stay the night. Claims to need no help. Will assess further tomorrow. Her entries become shorter after that. Her writing, once fluid and formal, begins to splinter. The next day's note is jagged, rushed. April the 4th. Unclear time. There's something wrong with their mouths. They move like they're learning to be human. One copies the other before speaking. I asked about their mother. They both pointed at the same tree. No words. Just pointed. By the final entry, her hand trembles across the page. April 4th, late, Their lungs don't breathe right. It's not wheezing, it's like timing, like one waits for the other. They hold hands in their sleep. I am the only one who blinks. Evelyn Cross never returned to Louisville. Her disappearance was quietly filed as a presumed accident in wilderness terrain. The official statement from the Department of Family Services blamed poor road conditions and lack of communication infrastructure. But privately, several field officers expressed concern. One noted that her assigned driver refused to take future jobs in Leslie County and left the program entirely. Another recalled a box of Evelyn's field documents being removed from the office by a man claiming to be with the state archives. No such name was later found in employment records. The journal itself wasn't seen again until 1979, when it surfaced at an estate sale in Harlem. It was purchased by a collector of Southern ephemera, who reported the strange smell and the way the ink had bled, as though the paper had sweated. On the final page, scrawled in different handwriting, possibly not Evelyn's at all, were 3 words: "We breathe together." Officials declined to reopen the case. One internal memo cited a desire not to stir fear among rural constituents. Her name was never added to the National Missing Persons Registry. But in Hien, they remember. Not her name, perhaps, but the story of a woman who walked into the hollow and never walked back out. On the morning of April the 12th, 1954, a light haze was seen curling above the trees at the edge of Hollow Ridge. The sight would have gone unnoticed, except for one man, Caleb Langford, a tobacco farmer whose land bordered the old Meriwether tract. In a statement recorded 30 years later, Langford recalled, "It wasn't like a fire I knew, not black smoke, not thick, just this pale grey rise, like steam off a kettle. And the air had a smell to it, wet copper and mould. Nothing burning should smell like that." Langford rode his mule partway up the trail before stopping. He wouldn't cross the boundary, not out of fear, he claimed, just instinct. What he saw from the ridge confirmed something had changed. The Meriwether cabin, once barely visible through overgrowth, was gone. Not collapsed, not decayed. Gone. The Leslie County Sheriff's Office received a call 2 days later. A field team arrived by midweek, guided by an old mining map and Langford's directions. What they found baffled even seasoned investigators. The cabin site had not burned from the outside in, as fires typically do in dry Appalachian timber. Instead, it had collapsed inward, charred in a tight, centralized radius. There were no signs of external accelerant, no tree-line scorch, no surrounding blaze. The perimeter looked undisturbed, as if the fire had ignited in the belly of the house and consumed only what it was meant to. Amid the ashes, a few objects survived. A child's leather shoe, badly burned, the laces melted. A fragment of jawbone, human, but without matching dental records in state files. And most haunting of all, 2 small sets of barefoot prints preserved in the soot like pressed clay, walking away from the ruin, side by side, into the woods, never returning. No adult remains were found, no signs of Lilla Mae Meriwether. But that wasn't the end of it. 3 days after the fire, the Leslie County office received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of yellowed paper, typewritten, folded twice. The note read, "The blood went in circles. The twins were never meant to see the sun." It was typed on a Remington Model 5, a machine common in the 1930s and early 40s, but with a distinctive ink blotting pattern, the kind associated with overused ribbons and misaligned hammers. Investigators tried to trace the letter. Postal records led nowhere. No prints were recoverable. No envelope remains were preserved. The letter was logged, copied, and quietly filed. No follow-up was ever made. For years afterward, local records omit any mention of the Meriwether fire. A 1955 audit of regional structure fires lists only 2 cases in Leslie County, neither matching the Hollow Ridge location. No insurance claim was ever filed for the property, no official death certificate issued. Instead, the land was marked abandoned, non-inhabitable. The parcel reverted to the county. No one purchased it. The trail leading to it faded back into forest. The absence of follow-up wasn't negligence, it was avoidance. Everyone knew not to dig too far, said retired Deputy Willard Mooney in a 1983 oral history. That house wasn't a house anymore. It was a wound. For decades, the letter remained in a personnel drawer in the old courthouse, nearly forgotten until rediscovered by archivists during a building renovation in 1991. It's now preserved in the County Historical Annex under a restricted file label, Merriweather Unresolved. To this day, no second letter has ever surfaced. No one ever confessed. But that phrase, "the blood went in circles," has become something of a local proverb in Hien. A warning not written in law, but remembered in silence. And though the house is gone, the path remains. Overgrown, yes, but not erased. Something ended that April, but not everything. Hing. After the fire at the Merriweather cabin in 1954, official documentation of the twins, if any ever existed, ceased entirely. No death certificates, no sightings filed under law. For the state, the case had burned itself into closure. But the people of Appalachia don't need paperwork to remember. They pass down stories. The first known post-fire sighting occurred in 1956, just 2 years after the cabin disappeared. A hunter named Edgar Mullins, a lifelong resident of nearby Dry Hollow, claimed he was tracking deer by lantern light along a creek bed when he saw something just upstream. 2 boys, barefoot, standing ankle-deep in water. "At first I thought they was just lost," Mullins told a regional folklorist in 1971. "But then I noticed, neither one of 'em moved, not even when I stepped in the water, not even when I raised the lantern. They were just staring at the current, same posture, same head tilt. One on the left had a twitch in his eye, like he was trying to remember how blinking worked." The hunter turned back. By the time he returned with others, the creek was empty. The next major account came from Margaret Hensley, a retired schoolteacher from Pikeville. In 1962, she reported picking up 2 teenage boys on the side of a road near Dismal Creek. They were pale. Not sickly pale, just paper-colored. Identical clothing, collared shirts tucked into slacks, hands folded in their laps like they'd been taught manners by someone who never met a child. "They never blinked," she wrote. "I offered them peanuts. They didn't eat. One of them turned to me and whispered, 'We're going back.' Then they opened the door at a bend in the road and stepped out. I didn't even stop the car." Mrs. Hensley filed no report. She told the story only once, during a 1974 interview conducted for a traveling radio program, Backwoods Shadows. That recording was broadcast once, then shelved. C. Opies survive only on tape reels now held in a private folklore collection in Charleston. By the late 1960s, stories of the Mirror Boys had taken hold across eastern Kentucky and parts of southwestern Virginia. Though no one agreed on names, ages, or exact features, one detail always remained. There were 2, always 2. Folklore spread in layers. Camp counselors warned children not to wander from firelight. Grandparents muttered about the boys who came to windows at night, staring through the glass but never knocking. In Hien, stories surfaced of screen doors left ajar in the morning, muddy footprints outside children's bedrooms, always in pairs, always barefoot. In 1968, the Leslie Ledger, a small-town paper, ran a 1-paragraph note in its Odd Reports column. Mrs. Leanne Carter of Mill Creek reports seeing two matching boys watching her cows from the ridge. Says they vanished when called. Husband claims she was spooked by shadows. No follow-up article was published. Academic interest in the legend peaked briefly in the early 1970s when folklorist Dr. Helen Worthing of Berea College published a small paper titled Echoes in the Blood, Appalachian Twin Lore and Anomalous Sighting Reports. In it, she catalogued nearly 22 distinct stories, all centered on two silent, identical boys appearing near water, glass, or doorways. These stories, she wrote, are not built from fantasy, they're built from memory. Whether supernatural or not, they carry a weight, familial, regional, inherited. They belong to a place that does not forget. Indeed, the stories continued. A camper in 1973 swore he woke to find two boys sitting cross-legged outside his tent, hands on their knees, faces slack with sleep or imitation. Others dismissed these tales as mass suggestion, born from decades of isolation, poverty, and passed-down dread. But those who've heard the stories long enough knows we're better. These aren't just campfire tales, they're inheritances, unwritten, unburied. A way of remembering what no one was allowed to say, that something survived the fire, and it was still watching. In 1971, Dr. Marshall Greaves, a retired clinical psychiatrist from Columbus, Ohio, moved into a modest rental cabin just outside High-End, Kentucky. Locals assumed he was seeking solitude after decades of hospital work, but his arrival was no accident. Unbeknownst to county officials or neighbors, Dr. Greaves had been privately investigating the 1953 disappearance of Evelyn Cross, a former student of his during her time at Berea College. Her case, long dormant and quietly buried, had troubled him for nearly 2 decades. He came not for peace, but for answers. Greaves began where the records ended, in the archive rooms of Leslie and Perry counties. He spent months combing through tax rolls, baptismal logs, and handwritten census supplements, searching for evidence of the family Evelyn had been sent to visit. What he found disturbed him. Entire branches of the Merriweather family, particularly from the years 1890 to 1920, seemed to vanish from public record after 1912. Births were logged, but deaths were not. Marriages disappeared mid-lineage. In one 1908 county registry, he found a list of 6 Merriweather children living at a now-defunct homestead. By 1915, the same names had been crossed out with no corresponding burial or migration notes. As Greaves tracked the family further, a disturbing pattern emerged. Inheritance documents, land transfers, even literacy records began to show overlapping names, uncles becoming fathers, cousins listed as siblings, the same surnames repeating in tighter and tighter loops. In a marginal note in his research journal, Greaves wrote, "Not a family tree, but a spiral. The blood turned inward." By 1974, he had compiled over 200 pages of notes, genealogical charts, and transcribed interviews with aging locals. One woman, now blind, told him, "They didn't marry out, never did. They kept to themselves like a promise." Greaves grew convinced that Lilla Mae Merriweather, long suspected of raising twins in isolation, had not merely inherited a twisted bloodline, she had deliberately preserved it. In a final typed note left on his desk, he wrote, "This wasn't caregiving, it was architecture. She built them." Greaves believed the twins Evelyn encountered were not a tragic result of isolation, but the intentional outcome of generational inbreeding, crafted over time by a woman who saw genetic purity not as science, but as ritual. He planned to publish. He had enough for a manuscript, enough to name names, enough to demand the state reopen the Cross case. But in February of 1979, everything stopped. A neighbor delivering firewood found the front door to Graves's cabin wide open. Inside, nothing appeared taken. His notes were stacked neatly on the kitchen table, arranged by chapter, sorted, labeled, and untouched. His tape recorder still had fresh batteries. His reading glasses rested on top of his journal. And placed squarely at the center of the table was a single black and white photograph, never seen before. It showed two boys, barefoot, standing knee-deep in a creek. Their arms were locked at the elbows, their heads tilted identically toward the lens. Their eyes reflected no light. It was unclear who took the photograph, or when. Greaves was never seen again. Search teams combed the hills for days. Dogs refused to cross a creek near the old Merriweather plot. No trace was found, not even footprints. His disappearance was ruled inconclusive. His colleagues, once skeptical, grew uneasy. Dr. Leslie Warren, who worked with Greaves at the Columbus State Psychiatric Hospital, later said Marshall believed in patterns, not ghosts, not curses. He saw intention where others saw accident. If he vanished, it's because someone decided the pattern was full. His notes were boxed and archived, though many pages are now missing. The photograph was preserved under glass and marked Evidence, Unknown Origin. The label has since faded. What remains is a growing consensus among researchers and folklorists alike. Greaves did not go too far. He simply got too close. And whatever Lila May built in that hollow, it was never meant to be examined. In the fall of 1992, a state-funded road expansion project was underway just north of Hyen, Kentucky, where crews were tasked with cutting a new bypass through one of the last undeveloped ridgelines in the county. The project had moved smoothly through bedrock and root systems until the morning of October the 4th. According to site logs, the backhoe struck something unusually soft beneath the eastern tree line. At first assumed to be animal remains, the disturbance revealed a shallow pit, roughly 6 feet in diameter, containing 3 partial skeletons, child-sized, curled as if placed deliberately. Construction halted. The area was taped off, and the Kentucky State Anthropological Unit dispatched within 36 hours. The lead anthropologist on the case, Dr. Eileen Cast, gave a statement 3 weeks later. Her findings were not released to the public at the time, but notes from a 1994 forensic conference would later surface in a research archive. The bones were human. Children, likely aged 7 to 10, but the skulls were deformed, not from trauma, but development. The cranial plates had fused prematurely. The jaws, one in particular, were unnaturally aligned, teeth overlapping in mirrored patterns. They were too symmetrical to be coincidence, too wrong to be twins. The remains bore no identifiers, no jewelry, no clothing, no remnants of cloth. DNA sequencing was limited in 1992, but mitochondrial analysis ruled out any match to known missing children in Kentucky dating back to 1960. Dental records found no comparison. The team found no signs of burial markers, no coffins, no shroud materials, just bare bone placed directly into the earth. But it was what they found on the smallest jawbone that drew concern and confusion. Etched faintly, almost imperceptibly beneath the right molars, was a shallow carving in the bone's surface, a looping shape, barely a half-inch wide, forming a twisted horizontal figure 8, the infinity loop. Dr. Cast's notes suggest it was carved post-mortem with a fine-pointed metal object. Not animal markings, not environmental erosion, but no further analysis was conducted. Within 6 weeks, the Kentucky Historical Preservation Office released its official statement. Indeterminate historic remains, likely pre-1950s. No current criminal relevance, case closed. The excavation resumed. A former field technician, speaking anonymously to a regional documentary team in 2001, recalled his experience processing the bones. I'd seen everything: burned corpses, Civil War graves, even a case of fetal remains in Pike County. But this wasn't right. Those kids weren't just deformed, they were copied, like someone tried to make the same person twice and got it wrong 3 times. When I saw the jawbone, when I saw that symbol, I packed my gear and left. I never worked another dig. The bones were transferred to state storage in Frankfurt, sealed in unmarked boxes, labeled with case ID HY92CH3. As of 2025, they remain unre-examined. No memorial was erected, no burial records created. The pit was backfilled, compacted, and now lies beneath the paved shoulder of Route 13A. The stretch of road is known among construction workers as the Quiet Cut, because no birds are heard in that curve of the ridge. None ever nest there. Among folklore circles, however, the discovery reignited old stories, tales of the mirror boys, of strange children seen in pairs, staring from creek beds or tree lines. The infinity loop, first mentioned in a Merriweather hymn transcription in 1917, became a topic of heated debate among regional historians and folklorists alike. Was it a family symbol? A curse? A generational mark passed through blood? In a 1997 article in Appalachian Record, folklorist Dr. Helen Worthing concluded, "We cannot explain what the state has chosen not to question, but in Hien, the ground speaks when the living won't. These children were not found, they were revealed. The mystery remains. No one has claimed them. No one knows where they came from. But the bones, muted, buried, marked, have become a kind of silent testimony. Not to what happened, but to how far the earth will go to hide what others refuse to see. By the 2000s, most had forgotten the name Merriweather. The cabin was long gone, the bones boxed and buried in government storage, and the stories, twins in the woods, children without names, had softened into folklore. But stories don't die in Appalachia, they just wait for new witnesses. In August of 2007, a pair of hikers from Hazard County took a shortcut through Hollow Ridge while mapping water levels near the old creek bed. One of them, a volunteer scout leader named Jeremy Fields, would later describe the moment in a local interview. "We came around a bend and saw something sticking up in the mud. At first I thought it was an old trail marker, but it was a wooden cross, just rough pine lashed together with rusted fence wire and tied to it, 2 children's shoes side by side, clean as the day they were bought. The shoes were 1950s era, canvas-soled, immaculately preserved. Scorched into the cross with a heated nail or wire were the words, 'Same blood, same soul, same end.' There was no nearby trail, no campsite, no grave. No one ever came forward to claim the memorial." 6 years later, in 2013, a retired bail bondsman turned freelance investigator named Royce Kellerman took on a personal project to trace a series of anonymous letters sent to post offices across 5 towns surrounding Hyen. The letters were small, typed on aging ribbon stock paper, all signed under one name, M. Merriweather. No return addresses. Each letter contained vague references to unfinished guardianship, misaligned offspring, and the quiet science of resemblance. The contents were unsettling but non-specific, enough to avoid legal action, but consistent enough to suggest a pattern. Kellerman cross-referenced mailing times and locations. He mapped them to a 42-mile radius, always rural drop boxes, always near ridge access roads. His conclusion was chilling. These weren't ghost stories. For me, one was maintaining the identity like a ritual, not hiding, circling. He submitted his findings to a local sheriff's office. The report was filed. No follow-up was made. Then, in 2019, the pattern broke containment. As part of a wildfire prevention program, the U.S. Forest Service deployed aerial drones over remote Appalachian woodlands. One drone, surveying elevation patterns over the edge of Leslie County, captured 15 seconds of footage flagged as unusual by internal software. The clip showed two barefoot figures, pale, thin, moving through dense brush. Their limbs swung in unnatural unison, heads tilted at the exact same angle. Even in pixelated grayscale, the synchronicity was disturbing. They didn't walk as two people. They moved as one. The footage was immediately archived under a false positive wildlife anomaly classification. It was never released to the public. But someone leaked it. A forest technician, name withheld, posted a frame-by-frame breakdown on an encrypted message board used by independent researchers and folklore archivists. The post was deleted within hours. But not before one final quote appeared beneath the video, typed in white against a black screen. "It's not that they survived, it's that someone wanted them to." The technician has not been seen or heard from since. Today Hollow Ridge is overgrown again. The road leading in is unmarked and satellite views show only tree canopy. Locals say GPS doesn't work near the creek. Phones glitch. Dogs go quiet. Still, some say they've seen figures in the dusk, always in pairs, pale, barefoot, watching. Researchers call it inherited folklore, a psychological echo, a rural myth born from isolation and grief. But that doesn't explain the drone footage, or the mail, or the bones that bore no matching names. The truth is simpler and darker. The story of the Merriweathers never ended, it just stopped being spoken aloud. And in its silence it changed names, became a movement, a pattern, a legacy fed from within. Same blood, same soul, same end. They are not gone. They're just waiting,